So raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll have someone come up with the microphone. So here is the first one. Yes. Yep.
Hello, Juhana Vartiainen. Just a question to Lars. An issue that we have discussed sometimes is this issue of the rigidity of the pattern bargaining model in the face of the need for a wage adjustment to increase employment in the public and the service sectors. Is it really warranted to assume that the current system limits wage growth from above? After all, we have this local wage setting, sometimes called drift. Municipalities like ours, for example, we just gave an extra pay increase of 5% to preschool teachers. 5% in excess of the collective agreement. Since it was clear to everybody that there's a shortage of them, we have difficulties in hiring them and retaining them. Nobody protested. Everybody was quite happy about this, not least the preschool teachers. So somehow we seem to be able to solve this problem. But it's important that this can be employer determined. We don't want to give that extra increase to everybody in the public sector, nor would it be a good idea to give it to in all municipalities, even in those areas where there's current depopulation. But in Helsinki, which grows, we seem to be able to address that issue by completely legitimate means. Thank you.
Was there a question, Professor?
Yes. I mean, there are no easy solutions, but the way I read what has happened in Finland, it doesn't seem to be the optimal way of handling these problems. I mean, you can describe it. It's like the parties in organizations in the labor market. They determine how much the central government should spend on health and care. So it's like the negotiators don't take the financial responsibility for their decisions. So that does not strike me as a good thing. Then I like more the sort of short-term Danish approach. Though I'm not sure that, I mean, as you say, it should be sort of tripartite agreements. But somehow, of course, the government must be involved since they are paying the shots. So I would like to end up somewhere in between, I guess, the Danish and Finnish models. I don't think we've handled it in a good way in Sweden either, as I said. It's like we tried through these figureless agreements to let market forces decide. It worked for a short time, but if you don't provide the funds, then the market forces will not work anyway. I'm not sure this was a very clear message. It was a bit confused, but this is because it's a really difficult problem. I mean, how do you at the same time use wage setting, I mean, to signal what we want to happen and to use market forces, but at the same time do not end up in a situation where we get wage spirals. So it's really a tricky problem. But some combination of the Finnish and Danish and Swedish models.
Do I see more questions, more raising hands there? Please.
Thank you for both of you. I'm Tuulia Hakola-Uusitalo from WAT. Lars said that you are not going to give us advice, but I'm going to ask if somebody suggested in Sweden that to have more at par the public sector and private sector, would it be a good idea to get the public sector to get give them a few % more than the private sector agreement. What would you say to that? And to Astrid, I'd like to ask in terms of that, are you moving in Denmark more towards outsourcing, and what does that do to public sector bargaining? Thanks.
Yeah, should I start? Well, we do outsource some. We also import labor from outside, which I think a lot of Western countries look at, whether it's possible to get, for example, nurses and doctors from maybe more poor countries to come to Denmark and work. I wouldn't say it's been a great success, because it turns out that it's actually pretty hard for them they come, and then they have to speak Danish, which is not easy, and I think that you would have the same problem in Finland and probably also in Sweden, Norway, that our languages are really hard. So it's you might want to do these things, but it's not necessarily something that would work in practice. At least that's what we've seen in the Danish case. So the outsourcing is something that we do. It's something that is discussed a lot, but in practice I don't think it works that well. And also we're just putting the problems on other countries. Then, I mean, we are optimizing on our own side, but we're definitely just making the problems a lot bigger in other countries. So in that respect, I also think it's probably not a good idea to do it. Yeah.
Well, in Sweden, I do think that there is a need for relative wage increase in the public sector, or for large groups there. I'm meaning higher wage increases in at least, well, in one or two wage rounds. But I mean, to do it, I think there needs to be a consensus among labor market organizations. So in order not to end up in a wage spiral, somehow we must get the employer organizations in the private sector and in manufacturing sort of to accept this, to see the problem of recruitment. And it is the health and care sector, and it is defense. But also, I didn't take this up, it's also the gender issues. I've been thinking more in terms of labor reallocation, but of course this would go, at least for the health and care sector, it would go hand in hand with sort of equalizing gender differences. It's different when it comes to defense, unless recruitment to military personnel is changed. But
it is in Denmark now. Women also have to
it will on the
now.
margin, but not more.
Still some questions we have time to take if you have. I can ask one question, of course, myself, if there is no one you can think about the questions that time. In Finland, I have heard plenty of times these last years that these numberless agreements would be a very good solution in Finland as well, and they have worked tremendously well in Sweden. Now you are saying that they haven't worked, so have we misunderstood how they work?
I mean, in the mid-2010s, they did work. So it was possible then for nurses and for teachers. These are the two big groups that benefited at that point of time from somewhat higher wage increases. But even then it was a very slow way of changing relative wages. But then from 2020 and onwards, it has not worked in this way, and not, especially not in recent years. Partly because the profit situation has been so good in manufacturing and the export sector, partly due to the strong depreciation of the krona.
Yes.
But I mean, it really is no silver bullet. I think for most of the time, when there are these figureless or numberless agreements, most of the time the norm binds there too. So that is sort of that's the benchmark for local negotiations. So it's in very special situations these agreements could work. But it would have to mean that the government give the funds then to the municipal sector to be able to raise wages, and that has not happened.
Any hands? Yes, there. Rob.
Thank you. Questions for you both, though. So for the last 30 years or so, union density has declined in all the Nordic countries. Union coverage possibly also the pressures towards that. What about if we come back in 30 years? Is there still a Nordic model that we could discuss in the same way, or are we talking about something very different 30 years from now?
Well, that's a big question, I think. I think we will still have a Nordic model. It might look different, right? Because we are adjusting it as we go along, and also trying to deal with some of the shocks that we see that are different also than the shocks we've seen before. So I think it will still be there, but I'm not sure what it will look like exactly. So you have more experience, Lars. Maybe you can add on.
Yeah, I mean, coverage of collective bargaining has held up, even though trade union membership has gone down. I don't know about the other Nordic countries. I know about Sweden that this has mainly happened for blue-collar workers. But there was a reduction in union membership for white-collar workers too, in association with some labor market reforms in 2007-8. But after that, union membership has gone up again for white-collar workers. Maybe sort of a slight trend that will continue to lower union density, but it seems, at least in Sweden, to be slow. I don't know about Denmark. Some people mention that you have these yellow.
Yeah, we call them yellow
trade
unions. Yeah, and they are taking up a bigger share.
Yeah.
And
that is not happening in Sweden at all.
But it has been discussed whether some of these yellow unions should actually start also negotiating, because they have, for some specific groups, they actually have the most of the people now. So they are becoming so big that maybe they should start negotiating. And that would put a lot of responsibility on their side suddenly that they haven't had before. So that might also change the picture.
But would they still have the same color if they start negotiating?
No, then I think they should change the color. At least they will be different. They would not have the same status as they have right now.
Thank you.
What is the distinction now?
They cannot negotiate right now. But they can make sure that the rules are followed.
They are not allowed to negotiate.
No, they're not negotiating right now, but they make sure that the rules are followed for their members. Yeah.
I have to ask that we continue this debate about the yellow unions on the coffee break. But thank you very much, professors. Thank you very much, all the people who dared to ask questions. And we'll continue with after a 10-minute coffee break, so about 11:50. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.